Welcome. Thank you everyone for joining the webinar today as we explore EHR and integration migrations. My name is Dan Rice. I'm Product Marketing Manager here at Rhapsody, and I'll be the moderator for our discussion today. First, I wanted to give a few logistical reminders. As you may have already noticed in the chat, this webinar is all about being interactive. And in addition to a polling question you'll see later, please post comments and questions in the chat, and we're going to do our best to address each of those during the call. However, while there are many advantages to being here live and in person, this session is also being recorded. So anyone who registers for this event will receive a link to the recording within 24 hours. We're always thrilled when those that use Rhapsody offerings are willing to speak in mediums like this on topics that are important. And today we're just super excited to not have one, but two such subject matter experts with us today. Julian Ammons from Baptist Health Jacksonville and Pat Hardwick from Overlake Medical. Both of these guys have been involved in migrations in their own organizations and have some unique perspectives to share. Thank you guys so much for both being here today. We'll start with Julian, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each organization. But Julian comes to us from Baptist Health Jacksonville, where he is currently the Director of IT Digital Cloud Development Operations. And a little bit about Baptist Jacksonville. Baptist Jacksonville services North Florida, South Georgia, and beyond with a medical staff of over 1,900 physician providers and a clinically integrated network, Baptist Physician Partners, with over 1,100 members. Baptist Jacksonville includes 6 hospitals that are recognized nationally for the great work they are doing. Julian, I found it really interesting that when we first talked, you had recently completed more than one migration. So I guess you do these things for fun over the last couple of years. Can you give the audience a little background about your recent EHR migration experience and what your team has been able to accomplish?
Absolutely. It really just became a hobby, so we try to do it every other weekend. No, we actually, when I came to Baptist, because we were doing a flip from being client hosted to remote hosted with Cerner Corporation, and that required a flip of our interface engine over to point to RHO. And then after doing that and getting it up and running, about 2 months later, we found out that we were flipping over to Epic. So we had to start all over again. So from our perspective, it really was just, we figured out how to do it. And then we got another opportunity to practice and make it even better. So it was just a chance for the team to really drill in and do a lot of cleanup on some of the things that we had out there. But it was an interesting and fun-loving experience, let's put it that way.
Well, thanks for giving us some background there. Pat comes to us from Overlake Medical Center and Clinics as a platform architect. A little bit about Overlake. Overlake Medical Center and Clinics is a nonprofit healthcare system based in Bellevue, Washington, that includes a 349-bed hospital and a growing network of primary, urgent, and specialty care clinics located throughout the region and a winner of multiple awards. Pat is the platform architect behind modernization of your recent integration update with CorePoint. Can you share a little bit more specificity of what you've been up to as well?
Sure. So we're nearing the end of our CorePoint implementation journey, migrating off our legacy integration engine to the cloud-hosted version of CorePoint. We have a on-premise Epic instance for the last 10 years. Our legacy integration engine was older than that, also on-premise. So we'd initiated an RFP process about a year ago, and after a lot of deliberation and review, we selected CorePoint. And at this point, we're about 90% complete with our implementation and just hoping to get our old engine completely shut down by the end of next month.
Excellent. So great timing here for today. Well, thank you both for giving us a little background there on recent and ongoing efforts. There are so many other Rhapsody customers and partners going through similar efforts to you guys, and I know they're going to really appreciate the insights. In fact, we often see providers looking at EHR and integration at the same time. And as we get started, both of your efforts were no small undertaking. Projects like this, everybody has to be on the same page. Downtime in your environments really aren't an option. Patients need to be taken care of. The back office has work that has to be done. It doesn't need to be disrupted. And in Julian, in your case, you're already using CorePoint. You've used it for a number of years at this and another organization that I'm aware of. but you made the move to Epic. And we've recently shared a Gartner asset even about this, about gauging your readiness for an EHR migration. Still available for download for those that haven't seen it yet. But I wanted to hear from you particularly, because you got some practical knowledge here dealing with this on occasions more than once. What advice would you give based on your own experience evaluating your team's readiness, getting them ready, and any actions or first steps that you'd recommend?
So I've had the privilege of doing it a couple of times. Even back in my Emory days, we originally flipped over from a homegrown solution for interfaces into CorePoint. One of the things that I've learned over the course of time is really about flexibility and catching every single detail that you can find in there. Like just letting the team know, guys, whatever you think of, no detail is going to be too small, because we don't know what we're going to be experiencing, and we really don't know what we don't know, which is it becomes difficult. So those two I highlight on there because it tends to be the people doing that technical lift and building interfaces. These aren't things that people see all the time. If I'm in Epic and I'm doing work, or if I'm in Cerner and I'm doing work, I see my screen and I think that it just works, right? I don't see the underpinning. So if you like analogies, you've come to the right place. If you don't like analogies, I'll apologize now. But I always tell my team that I use the Batman Superman analogy. You know, the clinical people are out there on top of the building, you know, with the Superman symbol on their chest, you know, providing hope to the world and letting people know that, hey, you come here, you can get help. We tend to be the technical people. We tend to be more like Batman. They guess if we exist or not, and most of the time we're an urban myth or an urban legend. And then the only time they know we're there is when we stop doing our job or something happens that we have to step in. We exist when we're useful, and it can be a difficult life, and it can be one that seems rather thankless. So we have to find ways to make sure that the team understands that, one, we are flexible around things and we want them to understand that flexibility, and two, that they are important. That's why those details and that innovation that they can put together becomes so important and have to stand out as they work on their projects.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing. Pat, your situation was a bit on the inverse. You had been leveraging Epic EHR, like you said, for a number of years at the time, but you made the decision to migrate your integration solution to CorePoint. And I'm just really interested to hear what you have to say about this. What led you to that decision that modernizing integration was necessary and, even more importantly, worth the effort? And how did you, along the way, help assess your team's readiness for that effort?
Sure. Well, we had recognized at Overlake for years that we had outgrown the capabilities of our old interface engine. It also didn't have the failover capabilities we wanted, which of course makes everybody a little nervous. And just the overall usability feature set was not meeting our interface analyst needs. There had been previous efforts to get a new engine in the budget, and those efforts had always been deferred. And of course, you know, COVID hit, and all of our budgets were hit hard by that. So while it never was, it had never left our minds, it had never made it to the top of the list. And what really brought it to the top of the list was Overlake had spun up a digital transformation program. And one of the earliest solutions that program had identified, a third-party solution that had had a significant ROI opportunity, it had to be put on ice because the interface engine was the barrier. It was going to take too much effort to try to get our engine, which required a lot of wonky workarounds to do certain types of interfaces, and it was just going to be too clunky to implement that solution. So that put the integration engine to the top of our digital transformation program list of we need to do this now, because we knew that wasn't going to be the last time we came across a third-party solution that was going to not fit with our legacy engine. In terms of readiness, the team they were ready for a state-of-the-art solution. They were desperate to feel like they were working with the latest and the greatest. So they recognized that they were struggling keeping up using the legacy engine, but at the same time, they were very intimidated by the size and scope of the project. So in terms of upfront, we recognized that that team was going to need support going into the project. The resources would have to be baked into the project plan. And we wanted to make sure the project was designed so our interface team was not just spending time maintaining the old engine while the new engine was getting spun up. We wanted them working side by side, getting the new engine implemented so that they can, as we wrap this up in another month, they can just continue running with it.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, thank you for that. And it really ties in, I think, with both of your comments. And we had a blog recently that really ties into digital transformation about really about getting your team, when you're thinking about sizing a team or planning a project, how important people, processes, and technology are all a big part of that. And you guys already have kind of touched on that in the first 5-10 minutes. It's giving your organization the best environment to succeed in. Looking at the big picture first. So but I really want to dive into some of those things that were said already, about roadblocks, about ROI opportunities that we're putting on ice, those fascinating topics. But before we do, I want to pop a poll up for the audience, for those that are here. And you'll see this pop up on your screen. It's going to be what is the biggest challenge? What we've done is we've narrowed it to one where I think anybody, when you see these questions on your screen, hopefully you can see it now. Pick one, like when you look at a project like this, you're undergoing this, maybe you've already done it, but what is the biggest challenge for your organization with a large migration project such as an EHR? Is it people, the lack of necessary resources, for instance? Is it technology, such as aged infrastructure or application? Or maybe it's budgetary and funding related, or maybe it's organizational alignment or just unrealistic expectations. Everyone's going to experience these in different ways, but I'm curious to see if you had to pick one out of that as being your biggest challenge, what would it be? And we'll close that in just a few seconds, maybe give it another 10 seconds, and we'll close that out just to get your take on it before we have Julian and Pat weigh in on this. All right. So we're sharing the results now, I believe.
People, we all need more people.
We can never have enough.
Yeah, and I like it looks like we've got a couple of things in there with the technology. Again, back to that, if you give your all-star team the tools to succeed, they're going to amaze, right? They're going to keep things going, probably do a lot more than they could in the past with those right tools. So that makes total sense. So yeah, let's see what Pat, Julian, what do you guys think as far as, I guess we'll start with Julian. What kind of roadblocks did you see during the EHR migration projects that you were involved with?
100%. The people was a big part of that process. Like I said, we never feel like we have enough people to get the work done, but somehow we have managed to do it because, like you said, we do have rock stars on the team. Timelines were really big for us as well. In all of our implementations, they were very, very, they were abridged timelines. So we had, I think we pushed Epic out in a year and a half. Cerner RHO, I think I came in the middle of that, and we pushed it out like 4 months after I got here, and they had just signed it like 6 months earlier. So timelines and how we were making changes, because Baptist has been kind of evolving over the time, really did affect us. But the biggest part, I'll always say, it was people. We had people that had been here for a very long time, 10, 15, 20 years. And so we had some people that were like, hey, I know how this works. I don't need any outsider to come tell me how this functions. We know how to make it flow. And I'm reminded of, I'm a huge sports fan, so I'm reminded of the Washington Bullets. If you're like me, and if you're around my age, I guess you might remember a Michigan team, the Fab Five freshmen from Michigan. I don't think they exist anymore, but they went to the national championship, barely lost. They were one of the greatest teams college basketball has ever seen. The Washington Bullets had 4 of those guys on their starting lineup, and they couldn't win a game. The problem became we had too many superstars and too many people that were trying to be captain of the team, and they weren't allowing the team to grow and working together as a team. We had to come together because we had a similar problem here at Baptist, and we were like, hey, we got to work together. We got to get this done. And we were able to turn the temperature down a little bit and get those people that we did have, even though we didn't feel like we had enough. We got those people all on the same sheet music, and we were able to put together a symphony and get everything out in on time, functional, and everyone was happy at the end of the day.
That's excellent and great analogy. What about you, Pat? Turning to you, what roadblocks did you have to solve for as you began to migrate to CorePoint integration from your legacy engine?
Sure. Well, right up front, and Julian alluded to it, my experience in healthcare has been that at least the places I've been, we are blessed with staff that have been in place for a long time, and there's a lot that is good about that. The challenge for us up front is getting those staff to sort of wrap their heads around, okay, we're moving this infrastructure to the cloud now. They've been used to having the engine on-prem, and what does it mean to move something to the cloud in terms of how it changes their work? What are they going to be responsible for? What not? So right up front, that was the challenge in terms of just getting the tools selected and approved. And then, of course, resource availability, resource alignment. We knew that was going to be a huge roadblock. We resolved some of that on the interface team by backfilling. We used Rhapsody Professional Services and outside consulting to support our interface team. And again, making sure that our team was front and center on the project implementation, so they're learning as much as they can about CorePoint. Our other IT teams, and I think Julian, you said turning the temperature down. I think when you tell the Epic teams and the IT systems teams that we're going to move 60 systems to a new interface engine, and these teams are already operating at capacity, that gets a lot of fear. And the project team, I think we understood that it was probably not, we didn't need to be that afraid of it. We kind of knew we weren't going to need to be tapping those teams a ton. The project team was going to be very busy, but we could manage how our impact to the other teams. But up front, we created a lot of structure and a lot of communication structure to get those teams sort of settled and on board. And then we were able to dial that back when we realized that we could manage this project with more agility and less impact on those teams. And then in terms of resources, we're also dealing with vendor resources. So every one of those interfaces requires a vendor resource, an IT resource, someone from the operations teams, and often an Epic resource. So getting all of those resources together is a huge amount of communication and communication tracking. And so we just needed to make sure, who did we talk to? When was the last time we talked to them? What was the last conversation? When do we need to remind them again? Because a lot of these things get sort of lost in the noise. So lots of communication tracking. And then for us, breaking down the project into 4 buckets. The interface build and the unit testing, the project team could manage that one completely. So we knew that that timeline was going to be one we could hold, because that was all in control of the project team. The data connection with vendors and network routing, that was going to require multiple resource alignment and could take some time. And then coordinating the tests and the prod cutovers. So by managing those 4 buckets, we could manage expectations amongst all the teams of how we're going to stick to our timelines and where we're going to hit roadblocks.
That's excellent. Yeah, a lot of project management know-how involved. It sounds like you were involved in, Pat. We actually had a question in the chat right near the end, I think, when Julian was speaking, but I think, Pat, you may have a perspective on too. But do you guys, when you think about your next migration, or if you started over again, is there any new trick or tip that you might incorporate, or that you would recommend to the crowd here? You gotta love those.
Oh man, so I'm sure Julian has plenty to say about EHRs. Speaking from the interface engine perspective, I think what our project did, and I assume it would do for a lot of organizations, is it shines a light on your documentation and how good or outdated it is. So we're using this opportunity to make sure we update all of our documentation, because we learn about each one of these systems. Because sometimes you set these things up with a vendor and it just runs for 10 years, and people forget what does this even do? Who does it serve? What part of the operations team? So making sure we are updating our documentation has been key, so that if we do have to move this again or just update things, we have a real up-to-date picture of what we've done and what we have.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Documentation is huge, and that was one of those areas that we had to improve upon as well. But for us, I would say if I had to go back and do it differently, considering my track record, I might get a chance here soon. But if I had to do it differently, I would definitely make it more agile. Coming from the development world, what I saw with the project as we were migrating was we were just getting the work done, and it wasn't in a fashion that I would call agile. So I would definitely be more agile with it and group that work into those buckets and say, okay, I'm going to focus on these during whatever you want to call it, a sprint, work group, whatever you want to call it. Put in the time, block off those resources, and go ahead and get that knocked out. I think had we done that from day one with at least the last migration that we had, it would have gone a bit smoother.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. I don't think we have any questions related to what we're on now. Someone did ask for a link to the Gartner report. We will send you that afterwards. If it hasn't already been dropped in, I can't get to the link easily based on everything that's on the monitors, but we'll definitely get that to you for sure. It's a great asset to review. Okay, one question I'm just looking at. Okay, someone wants to know, which this is a question that I think I've heard in a different way before, but do you guys have any thoughts on indicative size of beds and the size of your teams, both within the organization and contracted in? The side comment is so that we can assess given 1,800 beds and 6 full-time staff. Any thoughts on that? That's probably something in integration circles that's a constant debate, so I don't know if it's an easy straight answer. If you got a formula, let me know. I'm gonna write it down too. But
well, I could give an answer of what we have here, but I want to give a caveat and a bit of a disclaimer that one of the things, there are variables involved when it comes down to the size of your staff versus the number of beds that you have. I think Baptist is about 1,900 beds, and our integration team itself has it consists of 1 architect and 3 we call them interface analysts. So we do have that together, but part of what offsets that is that we are moving very quickly down the automation path. So some of the things that you would have to do from an interface support perspective, we're working to automate those things, like messages being stuck in queue, things that are getting kicked out and message queues just go down. We're automating those types of things so that we can get some proactive results in place. So I don't know that there's a true formula to it where you can say 1 analyst for every 2,500 beds or 500 beds or whatever the case may be, but there is that give and take of the number of people that you have versus the automation that you have in place that can assist those people with some of the things that are going on. We are moving very quickly down the automation path, not replacing human beings with automation, but if I can use another analogy, we tell people all the time, we're not trying to replace you with the automation we're putting around you. You're Bruce Wayne, who by himself is pretty formidable. He's filthy rich. He's got all these martial arts and all these things going on. But when you wrap him in the bat suit, he becomes more efficient and he's able to do more things out at night when he goes out doing whatever he does at night. That's the goal. We have analysts that are working and they're smart, they're brilliant, they're hard workers. We're wrapping them with automation, an automation bat suit, if you will, and making them more efficient with their jobs, not replacing, but making more efficient.
That's excellent. Yeah, because Robin's really not the same. I mean, you could hire a Robin, doesn't know what to do. I mean, who likes Robin?
I'm not even sure that guy. I'm not even sure Robin's bulletproof, man. I just don't know.
Yeah, that was excellent. All right, so kind of moving on. I think the next topic seems almost like an alternate reality, but it's all too real for many of you. Is you have an enterprise-wide migration. You've got hundreds of integrations. You've got dozens and dozens of vendors to interact with to make this happen. Yet you got to do this while maintaining your normal duties. You can't compromise quality. You can't compromise risk or speed. Oh, and by the way, can you reduce costs? So I'm assuming there's some of that going on in both of your organizations. How do you, I guess, Pat, let's start with you this time. How did you tackle that challenge?
Sure. Well, the cost conversation was interesting for us because our legacy engine was pretty inexpensive. It was, and we were getting what we paid for. So we knew we were going to pay more money up front for a new engine because we were replacing our old beat up pickup truck with a brand new truck with all the bells and whistles, towing capacity and such. So we couldn't say, oh, well, we're going to save money by doing this. But it was really around our soft costs and our opportunity costs in terms of, like I mentioned before, we had a third-party solution for utilization review that had a huge ROI opportunity associated with it. And so when we planned this project, we knew that as soon as we got the new engine up and running, we weren't going to wait to migrate all the other interfaces. We had net new solutions that were going to be towards the front of the line because those represented opportunities to immediately start saving money. Other soft costs were just around like reducing risk, having a system with failover capabilities, the satisfaction of our analyst team. When your team is working with an old technology, they feel like their skills are stagnating. And then certainly by going to the cloud, we recognize cost opportunities around not having to maintain on-premise infrastructure. The InfoSec and our network teams are happier because some of their work is offloaded. So that was our whole cost picture was sort of built around that. And then finally, this was foundational, as I mentioned before, for our digital transformation program. So this is a foundational piece for us to continue to implement solutions, and we're in the process right now of identifying our next fiscal year solutions. And we now know the engine is not a barrier to the work we want to do.
That's awesome. So you're able to realize the ROI of the other solutions that were previously backlogged. It sounds like can't even in my mind figure out, like, how much faster do you think it was, Pat? I mean, or I guess a roadblock when you're stopped, faster, approaches infinity. but yeah, like, how much faster do you think you can build things in CorePoint than you could in your legacy solution?
Yeah, it's hard to give a specific number now because the team is still learning and getting up to speed. The solution I mentioned that was put on ice, it was hundreds of hours that they had anticipated in terms of interface build. It was 10 interfaces. A lot of that estimate was they knew that our legacy engine couldn't do some of those interfaces, so they were going to have to come up with those funky workarounds, and so they're going to estimate really high. The actual build of those interfaces was well under 100 hours. I think it was under 50. But so it's not like it's, oh, well, it's only 50% of the time. But we definitely saw that it was easier. And the team, even though they are still learning and getting up to speed, they see the potential and they see how their lives are going to be easier in terms of new projects coming on board and the work effort they're going to have to do to get the interfaces in place.
Excellent. Julian, any thoughts on your own experience? I think you haven't spoken yet on reducing cost. I think you actually had a couple of creative ways because you already had that CorePoint experience. It felt like it was more like management, fine tuning, finding set cost savings here or there. I guess that's kind of where I was going. I'm asking you.
Well, yeah. When I first got here, one of the things that I noticed was we were running the engine. It was an older version of the engine, and we had everything running on one instance. And that instance was, any FTPs we had running, any TCP/IP connections we had, web calls, those things were all running on a single instance. And what we did through a process of conversation and looking at the costs that we had in place, we determined it would be cheaper to stand up a separate instance and put an MFT managed file transfer license on it. Because at the end of the day, we were spending $600 per connection for every SFTP, and that's 2 connections outbound and inbound for every SFTP. So you're spending $1,200 per vendor that you're going out there and using that. And we had about, I think it was somewhere between 60 to 70 connections that were out there. And so we were able to take that and realize the savings by moving them over to the MFT, where each connection was only $100 per connection. So those types of things are how we saw an immediate reduction in cost. That was simply while we were still client hosted. The move into the cloud had so much more reduction with it, kind of to what Pat was alluding to there as well, as far as the adjacent teams to us, they were like, yeah, you know, now there are certain things we don't have to touch. We're basically moving that into the cloud and kind of indemnifying all of that, so we can now focus on some other innovation. So the fact that we run such a lean IS department, it makes those things become super important, because now I'm not having to focus on, you know, the everyday tasks to keep the core point servers up and running. That's now in the cloud. I'm able to innovate from utilizing some other methods. And they were actually able to come up with a plan to make our core point cutover a little bit smoother than it would have been. We didn't go interface by interface. We worked some magic to get it up into the cloud from our network engineers that were able to put something together to make it really flow a lot smoother than having to go touch each one at a time. So those types of things, that's where we were really seeing a lot of our value with time savings as far as the people, and those licensing costs where it's going down. And obviously there are those soft costs there where people they feel like they're working on the latest and greatest. So, you know, they're excited about the new shiny toys.
That's awesome. So yeah, transitioning over to the next topic, and this is something you guys have already touched on. It just happens to be on our outline. Kind of maybe we touched on it briefly. So I want to ratchet it up a little bit on as far as managing timelines, because I feel like there's probably someone on the call that knows they have the hundreds of interfaces similar to you guys. They know they've got dozens and dozens of vendors to work with and coordinate with to make these, you know, move over these interfaces, but they've given a timeline to them and they're not really feeling really good about their plan and how that matches up. Do you have, given your experience, do you have any advice that you would give them in addition to what we've already talked about?
Documentation, make sure that it exists, and if it doesn't, at least an inventory. And once you get that inventory, and after you finish crying for about 10 minutes, aggressive prioritization and open lines of communication, because the team is going to look at that the same way you do from a leadership perspective and see it, and it's going to be overwhelming. It's overwhelming to you, it's going to be overwhelming to them. Get it out of the way so you can see it and prepare yourself to go to your team and be a support, a line of support for them, because they're going to need it. That's why keep the communication open. Listen to their gripes, listen to their complaints, listen to them tell you how it's not going to work, and then put together a plan to make it go. That's where the aggressive prioritization comes in. I think Coach K talked about it in the Duke game, where Christian Laettner turned around and did the jump shot to win at the last minute. He said when they came together and they were in the huddle, everyone looked at him and were like, Coach, the game's over, we're done. He listened to it all and he said, okay, I hear you, but here's the plan. You have to take that approach and get people ready to go. Lay the plan out, tell everybody their role, aggressively prioritize, and then go and execute.
Pat, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, ditto. I think to add to that, it's be clear on what you can and can't control. And you know, for us, and I sort of touched on that, where there were elements of the project we had complete control over. When it comes to vendors, you don't have control over that. And if I were to look back and say, well, what could we have done to improve or streamline that vendor communication? I'm not sure it would have saved us enough time, but certainly understanding your documentation. If your documentation is great, then you can have a higher level of confidence that you're not going to get any surprises when you start opening up those vendor conversations. For some of ours, we didn't know that the contract didn't support implementing a new interface engine, so we had to sign it, get a quote to get the work, to get the vendor to support that migration. So there are those things that can delay. And then in terms of that aggressive prioritization, aggressive communication, just have the team be ready for how aggressive are you going to push your people? How aggressive are you going to push your vendors? For us, it's been a light touch because we haven't had that hard end date. But with that said, and it's worked great because it's been almost a silent migration for us. The operations teams have hardly noticed it. We're also now getting to that point where, like, okay, we need to not be such a light touch anymore. We have a dozen or so systems that have been kind of stragglers, and we've been going around in some cases for 5 or 6 months. And now we need to push a little harder and say, okay, this is the end date. We have to meet this end date now, because we can't have this going on for another 6 months.
Excellent. All right, so kind of transitioning over to one of our final topics today. we were going to talk a little bit about, it was interesting when we first kind of started talking what we were looking for and, you know, getting feedback from people like you. And you just both happen to be cloud first. It really was somewhat coincidental that you were both cloud first, and you've already talked about that a little bit. But as a part of being cloud first, could you speak to any other gains that you've seen since going down this road?
For us, it's really been efficiency, right? More one of the things we before we went to the cloud, and of course I'm talking more enterprise wide. CorePoint moving into the cloud, going to CAS was part of our strategy anyway. We were going to do that, and that was part of our larger cloud strategy. Our Baptist cloud strategy, period, has added efficiency and gains around automation and just time savings from what used to take 8 hours to stand up a traditional infrastructure server on VMware and things of that nature. We've now automated that process, and it takes 1 hour. And that's just to stand it up and get everything on it. So the cloud has allowed us to have that level of flexibility and allowed us to innovate more. Our development team develops all in cloud. So those are the gains that we've seen from a Baptist perspective, at least by going into the cloud.
Yeah, you even mentioned, I think in our previous kind of our earlier prep meeting, you mentioned, I hope I don't misphrase this, but you talked about changing the mindset from being maintenance minded to innovation minded. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Well, yes. I apologize again. Another analogy. We spent a lot of time firefighting instead of making ourselves fireproof. Before we got into the cloud, it was always there was an issue. We got to run and fix this. And every day it seemed like we were putting out fires instead of going in and saying, okay, this was a fire today. How do we become proactive with it? The cloud has given us a lot more flexibility on the ability to do that because we have people in place now that we're looking at that to say, okay, we had a problem yesterday. Instead of waiting for that problem to occur again and then going and writing a targeted script, we're going in and saying, okay, we're going to catch it before it happens. What were the symptoms to lead up to it? And let's get it resolved. The cloud really has given us that kind of flexibility so that now we've become less firefighter and more architectural engineer to build structure that just won't catch fire.
Very cool. Pat, anything that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on a couple things, but just some more specific examples. Like our network team doesn't have to manage 24 VPN tunnels anymore, so they're thrilled with that. By being in the cloud, and I think we're going to see this more in the coming years as more vendor solutions are in the cloud and they get more comfortable with cloud-to-cloud connections. Not everything is a VPN tunnel anymore. CAS is in AWS. If the vendor is in AWS, well, now we have a couple different types of connection opportunities, and maybe we can get away from some of the older VPN technology. I mentioned the InfoSec team is happier. I think the biggest thing that gets overlooked is just there is no risk of technical debt here, and technical debt is a huge issue in healthcare. And by being in the cloud, we can't compromise. We can't say, oh well, we're not ready to do reboots right now. It's a bad time. We're too busy. We have to do maintenance. We have to install updates, and it's non-negotiable. And I think what we found is, and again, it's that fear-driven prioritization. Well, we're worried it might break something, when the reality is it mostly doesn't. And in the end, it actually saves you a lot of effort, as Julian was saying, by going into that fireproof mode.
Good. I like the way you connected those two thoughts. And a lot of times we talk about when we end up talking with customers about integration hosted in the Rhapsody cloud, in this case, CorePoint as a SaaS. We often talk about security, we talk about scalability, we talk about resiliency. I think in the last 30 minutes, you guys have mentioned all of that, and that all plays a big part. But even more so recently, the scalability and what you're able to do and accomplish because you have those things in place. Anything else that comes to mind?
I'll tell you one thing that comes to my mind. We talked about, I think we talked about it in our prep sessions too, around speed to value. It's huge, right? From a development perspective, from anything that we're doing, like how do we get from idea to actually implementation and getting it out there where it can use? Going to the cloud has provided us the means of doing that a whole lot faster, where before everything that we had in place, even not just from a core point perspective, but from a larger enterprise cloud perspective, it took a while. Like I said, 8 hours for just a server. If it took 8 hours for the server, imagine what it was like developing on it. We've now been able to really trim that down and be able to provide a usable product in a much faster time frame. And we're doing the same thing with CAS by going out there, providing a much usable product in a much faster time frame by not only putting it in the cloud, but also by reforming our processes to make sure that we are being more agile and getting things out a lot faster.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really great. Thank you for sharing that speed to value comment. Certainly something we talk about a lot, but to hear you talk about it and put it on your own terms was really, really great. So we may be getting a question in, but I just wanted to preface real quick. You know, I know you guys are both very, very cloud first, but Rhapsody is committed to providing value across the spectrum. We're committed to having all these different flexible ways to deploy Rhapsody integration, which is what we've been talking about on our side today. So if it's your infrastructure, that's great. We're cloud neutral when it comes to hosting it yourself. Or if it's software as a service, as Pat mentioned a moment ago, we lead with AWS. Or if you want to further automate, there's the Envoy iPaaS solution, integration platform as a service. So, so wherever it might be, we provide different layers of value to meet you where you are, to address your biggest need, so you can do more for your internal and external customers. So, so before we close, I just want to mention, if you're trying to decide what to do here, and you want to hear about other customer journeys and where they've been and how they benefited, then you can certainly go to rhapsody.health. We talk about some of the other customers that quantified value and the way they did it before and then the way they did it after with Rhapsody or CorePoint. Some of these Unity Point Health, Children's Minnesota, OU Health, WVU Medicine. You can read about those, but at the end of the day, we're trying to down the line help improve data quality. It's not just about moving information, it's moving information that can be used for actionable insights. It's about eventually reducing the cost of care and making it better. So check out these and more on our website. And then before we close, I just want to ask one more time, are there any other questions? Let us know in the chat. All right, and we'll just give that another second. Go ahead, Pat, sorry.
Yeah, while you wait for questions, I just wanted to add to you're talking about meeting the customer where they are. One of the things we took into account when we selected CorePoint as a service, and I'm a worst case scenario guy, so my thought was, well, if this just doesn't work for whatever reason, just going to the cloud for the interface engine did not work, we knew that worst case scenario, we could fall back to an on-prem and it wouldn't be starting from scratch. And so that helped ease a little bit of that. I talked about that fear of, that for Overlake, the cloud was kind of a new thing to move core infrastructure to the cloud. So knowing that, hey, this is a fallback plan, highly unlikely, but it's there, was important for us.
Excellent.
Likewise, we had a similar, we were in a bit of a different situation. We were already on-prem with CorePoint, but we knew that, so we knew for sure we could fall back to being on-prem. Let's go back to use the service that we had. We would have had to adjust our game plan a little bit, but we knew that that option was always available.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. And I don't think we have any more questions in the chat, but we really appreciate everyone attending. Thank you, Julian and Pat, again, for all the insights that you provided today. And that concludes our webinar today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.